I'm trained as a physician. I'm an infectious disease and medical microbiology specialist, and I work at a Montreal University. I remember a time when we were working in remote Madagascar. We were trying to solve the TB transmission problem in those really remote and rural communities where access to care is highly limited. And we figured, what if we could use some form of technology to assess differentially which households are producing the more cough and are therefore at higher risk of having active TB patients there. And so the first idea was to do some form of quorum or environmental monitoring of cough sounds and try to target at different households where we could focus our activities. And this project and the idea we had in the first place never made it because of privacy and ethical issues. So, but that was really the first idea, or the first time I said, well, let's just use the cough. And then this merged and evolved in different projects, a lot of them actually in partnership with Hive. And what Hive was at its inception, and building a cough detector, and then starting working on trends and seeing whether we can fish some signature signals for specific diseases and sounds. And but the initial trigger was that idea of doing some syndromic surveillance in a high-risk environment and trying to focus our interventions better. The bigger trial was branded as Making Cough Count for Tuberculosis. It has mostly two components. One is to build a global, rich database of well-characterized cough sounds so that scientists across the globe can build cough triage or diagnosis algorithms depending on their performances. And this line of work has really progressed well. At this point, we've collected over cough sounds over 2,000 patients in 7 different countries, and this has now been released as an open data set that any scientist can access. And it's also been designed so that a subset of the data set is kept secret, or it's blinded to users, so that any current or future cough analysis programs or models could be tested on that secret data set to assess its performance. So Hive has supported us in collecting all those sounds and curating the data, making the data available, so that now we have a kind of benchmark model for TB triage, but also a data set that's going to serve us in the future in assessing new models that are being developed. So that's one component, which is really oriented towards TB triage. And then the other component is on the longitudinal monitoring. So a subset of those field sites and patients were also enrolled in longer studies where we collected their cough for longer periods, ranging from 2 weeks to 6 months, after either seeking care or being diagnosed with tuberculosis. So we have a fairly large cohort, and we're able to use that data to establish whether or not there are signals in the cough trends indicating treatment success or failure, relapse. So really working on this idea of using cough as a biomarker that's not necessarily only for diagnosing disease, but also really to support clinical management throughout management of disease. This would have tremendous value as a triage tool, whether alone or in combination or before or after other triage tools that are available out there remains to be seen. But the real value is that it's highly accessible and virtually cost neutral. So I think for the cough classification or the sound analysis, the niche is really for those high TB burden countries where health systems are underdeveloped and are not able to, provide sufficient access or reach out to remote communities that are at risk of TB, to have a tool that is digital and easily deployable on large scale, to do some mass triage and then either refer to imaging, chest x-ray, or confirmation testing. I think that's the highest value we can see there. Then for the longitudinal monitoring, it's very different. And I think this goes way beyond TB. We use several vital signs in medicine, and we use different markers on a longitudinal basis to care for any or many disease. I think in the end, cough could become one of them. That is just another metric that clinicians have access to make sure that their patient is doing fine, their treatment's working, there's no exacerbation of their clinical condition. I think the challenge to succeed in that transition to clinical use is to really increase our understanding of what are meaningful clinical signals in cough trends, because it's a lot of data. And cough, everybody coughs every now and then. It's not necessarily a problem. So I think we're at the stage of we have good tools. We are able to generate reliable data. We can see value for longer term clinical management, but it's just a matter of finding, what's the meaningful and usable signal in those data set that we can feed a clinical team with, and that they can know what they need to do with that information. The more different devices you have to do the same job, even if there are slight differences in the performance, their intrinsic ability to accurately monitor the cough, then if they're actually used, it's better. So I think for most of the situations where we've seen that we were not getting any data, I think wearables such as a smartwatch could have addressed some of that. So yeah, I see value. I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, and it can indeed address some of the shortcomings of phone-based recording, especially on closing those gaps in the longitudinal time series of cough recording. So if you want to improve the quality of the data, you can combine accelerometer data, the cough data, to make sure that when you're recording, the patient is actually wearing the device, or when you're not recording, it's because the device is standing still and it's probably absence of data instead of absence of cough. And then what other sort of biomarkers or other features that you'd like to include in models? Well, that's an exploding field of how we monitor patients in remote settings and all the mobile health applications. Some will take continuous temperature, breathing rate, pulse, the number of steps they do in a day. And I think we've not yet made a lot of progress or work into how do we combine cough with other longitudinally collected, simple biomarker, not fancy expensive blood tests, but just stuff that you can track with those portable devices. And that's one of the areas we'd like to explore, but I don't have any data to say, well, cough needs to be combined with this or that, and for that specific clinical application, it helps us in which way. But certainly now that we're getting better at monitoring cough, because we have better technology, because we're getting more accustomed to analyzing the data, I think we're getting close to that point where it's time to merge cough with other variables. But certainly there's room to grow there. As clinicians, we ask those questions to patients, and despite having this very, refined questionnaire that yields a lot of data, it's not like if we have a very differential way of analyzing those answers in a clinical practice. A patient could come and say, well, my cough is not productive, but then chest x-ray says there's an infection. When we use those data points in a patient-reported way, um, they don't lead to a clear dichotomical and very, um, I'd say, stratified approach to manage patients. So even if we would get that information maybe more reliably because monitored continuously and analyzed independently of patient reporting, I'm not sure the clinician you feed the information with would make a different call. I don't know really how that changes my, management or decision to test or not for a specific disease or another. Um, and that's on the initial presentation, diagnostic slash triage mindset. Now, if we're thinking longitudinally monitor, then of course, if a patient has COPD and is at high risk of having infections and being readmitted because of exacerbation of their disease, then if there's a longitudinal, reliable comparative analysis of whether the cough is starting to become more and more productive and that something is, cooking, and that the patient is at higher risk of self-presenting because there's an exacerbation, and then we can act prior to that health-seeking behavior and maybe avoid hospitalization or clinic or antibiotics, or by better management earlier on, then there would be value. But strictly for diagnostic purposes, I don't think there is a lot because us doctors don't know what to make of that information. In a few decades ago, we started doing some molecular epidemiology typing so that we could know which bacteria are alike and who transmitted to who. And we've refined the technology so much. Now we're looking at the whole genome of the bacteria. We know every gene and every mutation. But it's not like if we've made the same amount of progress on really establishing how can this technology be used prospectively and change clinical practice. So looking ahead, I kind of see the cough monitoring entering that same, I'd say, crossroad of, are we going to keep pushing and improving the technology so that we get more data, more reliable data, better data, without having to work on the other component of it, which is what are we doing with the data? Because if we're getting better and better at recording and providing healthcare workers with 1 year, 24/7 comprehensive, reliable cough time series for a patient, if it leads to no action, if it's information that we'd like to see because we think it's nice, but it's not changing the way we manage patients, either in preventing unfavorable outcomes, acting earlier on some specific signals, treating them earlier so we can break transmission chains. So I think looking ahead, I'd like to see more evidence emerge as to what are actionable information from the cough signal that we can do and that actually have clinical impact, and start measuring impact in terms of, how is this better for the patient rather than how better is the quality of the data we generate.